I think that probably influenced every composer that's alive in some way or another, maybe negatively, maybe positively.
As is the case with many pieces of Cage, there is a kind of formal conceptual basis which is manifested in the score and the documents associated with it. And then there's a performative conceptual basis which has kind of been added on to the score.
It seems to me that someone is talking, and talking about his feelings or about his ideas of relationships. But when I hear traffic, the sound of traffic here on 6th Avenue, for instance, I don't have the feeling that anyone is talking. I have the feeling that sound is acting. And I love the activity of sound.
One of the biggest mistakes that anyone could make was to think that this was easy, you know. No one realizes how much work he put in. I mean, even though his instructions for his pieces, sometimes you say, oh my God, you know, they're so, I don't understand them, they contradict themselves. He meticulously worked on that stuff.
People expect listening to be more than listening. And so sometimes they speak of inner listening, or the meaning of sound. When I talk about music, it finally comes to people's minds that I'm talking about sound that doesn't mean anything, that is not inner, but is just outer. And they say, these people who understand that finally say, you mean it's just sounds? Thinking that for something to just be a sound is to be useless. Whereas I love sounds, just as they are.
Talked a lot about whether things are more musical within a music school or near a music school than they are near a factory. I can remember a long discussion about, is a truck going past a factory more of a musical sound than a truck going by a music school? Or do people outside of the music school, are they less musical than people within the musical school?
And I'm not so stupid either. There was a German philosopher who's very well known, Immanuel Kant, and he said there are two things that don't have to mean anything. One is music, and the other is laughter. The sound experience, which I prefer to all others, is the experience of silence. And the silence almost everywhere in the world now is traffic. If you listen to Beethoven or to Mozart, you see that they're always the same. But if you listen to traffic, you see it's always different.
John and one of the students and my wife Sally and I went to the little Greek vegetable store down Clark Avenue just south of Howard, and we're picking things out. John and Sally were caressing every individual piece of fruit. We get up to the checkout point and the owner said, "Are you guys in show business?" And of course everybody had a good laugh. The next morning we picked John up at the Orrington Hotel. He said, "I now have the answer." And I said, "The answer to what?" He says, "Are you in show business?" I said, "Oh." He said, "Well, the answer is there any other?"
Because I was a vocalist who liked to sing contemporary music, I was instantly recruited. There just weren't too many vocalists that liked to sing contemporary music, and I had already had, as an undergraduate, quite a bit of experience doing it. So I was recruited and then found out that Cage was going to be here. And I figured as long as I stuck to my own instructions, you know, within Cage's parameters, then I would be safe. And just thought beyond that, you do what every performer tries to do, and that is enjoy the experience. And apparently he enjoyed the experience too, because he rushed on stage, he kissed me, he was supposed to perform Empty Words, and he said, I haven't had so much fun in ages. And then he said, I was supposed to perform Empty Words, but I'm an old showman and I know when not to follow an act, so why don't you all come back tomorrow and I'll do it then.
Now, Mr. Cage, I know that you teach a course in experimental sound at the new school.
Experimental music.
Experimental music.
Yes.
Will you tell us quite seriously whether or not you consider what we're about to hear music? No tongue-in-cheek, but seriously.
No, perfectly seriously, I consider music the production of sound. And since in the piece which you will hear I produce sounds, I would call it music.
You will call it music, all right? Now, lest you think this is some sort of a stunt, I would like to show you a review of a new album that Mr. Cage has made. This was in last Sunday's New York Herald Tribune. It is not entirely favorable. It says, however, on records, his weird sounds, bells, cymbals, prepared pianos, and electronic devices exert a surprising degree of charm and affability. Then it goes on to say that certain compositions of his are really a delight to the ear. This is something that cannot be said of quite a few other of the Cage items. But the Tribune takes him seriously as a composer, and this as a new art form. Inevitably, Mr. Cage, these are nice people, but some of them are going to laugh. Is that all right?
Of course. I consider laughter preferable to tears.
One of the faculty performed a piece where John created sounds by taking table tennis balls and dropping them on the piano string, and that in itself is going to create new kinds of sounds. Again, the first reaction is, I mean, this is ridiculous. But as soon as he did it, and the sounds came out, it was absolutely fascinating. It was that kind of thing of making music happen, where you turn on 12 radios at one time and have them all tuned to different channels, different stations, and see what in the world happens. You have to be prepared for events like that. Otherwise, you think either the man is crazy or you've lost it completely.
I attended one rehearsal, and I think that this is referenced in a few places where the students, after performing one of his chamber works, they don't know what it was, asked him, well, how can we make the performance better? And John said, well, maybe you can open the window. I think that was the least expected outcome of that anecdote, but he was that flip, that confident. He would stay up late at night, and even after, come over for another conversation or invite somebody into the lobby of the North Shore Hotel. I just remember he was busy 20 hours a day and showed no sign of being a man of almost 80 years old.
The whole idea of being original, you know, is something that I think ties students up in knots. For some reason they learned in music school that their work has to be original, and you realize that nothing's new under the sun, as they say.
Hi, I'm Steve Drury on the faculty at New England Conservatory. This is John Cage's prepared piano. The preparation for the piano is very extensive. About half of the notes on the piano are prepared. It takes 3 hours at least to fully prepare everything. I am preparing the piano according to Mr. Cage's instructions, with objects such as screws, bolts, little strips of rubber inserted between the strings in order to change the sound of the strings and turn it from a piano, which sounds like this, into a percussion orchestra, which sounds like that.
It was very, very tedious work and very time-consuming and very frustrating in a certain sense. You didn't get quick results. But the other part of his way of being always was concerned with precision and with the desire to impose a discipline that was sufficiently specific that results would be gotten which were not inflected in any way by taste. And sometimes that degree of precision was very high.
I'm trying to follow his instructions as closely as possible because they're very detailed, and they also unfortunately leave out information just when you really need it. With all the notes listed, objects, sometimes there's more than one, sometimes there's 3 objects in any given string. And exactly how far away from the damper it is. Rubber usually is a little more dependable. It's a rubber strip made out of slicing up old canning jar rubber. Your grandmother maybe canned vegetables. And you can still find this in some hardware stores. And it makes for a nice little rubber strip that, instead of a note sounding like this, it would sound like this. Creates a little more wooden sound. And one way to use plastic to prepare is off the top of a loaf of bread. And the plastic can be threaded over and under the strings.
Percussion instruments and the prepared piano are intrinsically unstable with respect to sound. You can assume that a pizzicato open string on a violin will sound a certain way, and pretty much will always sound a certain way. You cannot assume that a bolt put into the strings of a prepared piano will produce the same sound. It was impossible to define fully the sound world of a prepared piano. You had to accommodate, you had to accept these alterations. It reconnected Cage with that acute sense of precision and logic, the kind of inventor's mentality that he got from his father, wanting things to go in the right place so that the whole machine would work.
I just always liked the way he said, musicians will look at me and say, well, he's not much of a composer, but he's a good philosopher. And then he said, and philosophers will look at me and say, he's not a philosopher, but he's a pretty good composer.
He would go over to one side of the stage and he would say something, and then he'd walk across the stage and he would talk about the same subject, but he'd completely contradict himself.
He gave a talk in any case, which, as my memory of it, corresponds more or less to the score as it exists now. I remember the throat microphone, I remember the cigarettes, I remember drinking the water. And I had no idea what to make of this.
It affected in a rather profound sense that I became much more aware of, in the case of John Cage, of course, silence. And it seems to be a natural condition of humans. We don't like voids. But when you allow the void to happen, things can become very exciting.
He loathed to be referred to as an influence on anybody. If you asked him about being an influence, he would frown. It was not in his personality. I wrote an obituary for the New Art Examiner when he died, and I talked about his laugh, which was silent, so as not to impose on anybody around him.
And the meal was late, and the lamb was getting cold, and one of the guests was saying to him, you know, John, you just have to taste this lamb. it's so special, it's so tender, not really knowing about his commitment to a vegetarian or non-animal fat kind of a thing. And at one point, he actually took a piece of lamb and held it up toward his lips. I can remember seeing him then dropping it on the floor after. But in order to accommodate a major donor, somebody who was a member of the Arts Club, he agreed to this. So finally, this macrobiotic catered meal came, and we could all sit around and talk.
He was a problem. He was a koan, a Zen koan. A story, a question that couldn't be answered, and fascinating for that reason. That's John Cage as a composer and thinker, I mean. But if we assume that for Cage, the music is his attempt to provide an answer to that fundamental existential question. What do you do about control or the absence of control? I can't see that that question's ever going to go away. And I can't see that the music will cease to be useful in understanding it.